Right, well, thank you all for coming to this session today. My name's John Lavender, and I work for Lavender Consulting, so I've got a very good boss most of the time. My partner in crime today is Courtney McAllister from Yale Law Library, and we're going to talk about reviewing eBook platforms. Courtney's going to talk about it from a librarian perspective, and I'm going to talk about some research I was commissioned to do. The outline was that we were commissioned by Michigan Publishing to review ebook platforms following their takeover of the ACLS Humanities ebook platform. And I'd like to thank Michigan Publishing for allowing me to use the results of the work I did for them to be shared at this meeting, and also for the University of Michigan Library, who gave me access to the platforms I reviewed. In total, I reviewed 17 platforms, both aggregator and publisher platforms in both the sciences and the humanities. Now, I'm just going to give you a little history of ebook platforms because although it was 20 years ago, and I probably don't look that old, I was actually there at the beginning. The first virtual ebook library launched was EngNetBase, which I launched in 1999 when I was working for CRC Press, and it was sold on a subscription basis. The term NetBase had been given by a particularly technologically challenged president who'd used it for a CD-ROM product, which confused the hell out of librarians, so we decided we'd better get it on the web pretty quickly, and then the name would fit the product. Earlier library-type platforms were also aggregator ones, NetLibrary, if you remember that, which is now part of EBSCO, and eBree, which is part of ProQuest, and there were some others that fell by the way. The ACLS Humanities eBook collection was actually launched in 2002 and sold on a subscription basis. And then individual publishers started to launch their own eBook platforms. So we're talking about things that have only been around about 20 years. The platforms reviewed in this exercise were 4 aggregator platforms and 13 publisher platforms. And if you want to preserve your sanity, I don't recommend reviewing ebook platforms over many days. After a while, my head was spinning, my eyes were spinning, and a scene from The Exorcist could have been done. And to rationalize it all, I did the only thing I knew what to do, which was to produce a grid. And that was it. Don't worry, it's on the site. I won't be asking anyone any questions about it. But what I managed to do was filter down what I was looking for and saw whether the sites would do it. When ebook platforms started, both the aggregators and publishers had to build their own. There was no out-of-the-box software available, and so there tended to be many differences in how the platforms looked, how they functioned, how they performed, and what they did. But as ebooks became more popular, companies formed that developed ebook platforms to sell to publishers. And the result has been that there is more uniformity in platform functionality as vendors and publishers borrowed ideas from each other for the platform. Well, we call it borrowed ideas. Stolen would be a better expression, because one of the great things about publishers is that although we protect rights with a virtual frenzy, we happily steal from other publishers any ideas they have. So someone once said to me, there's only ever been one original idea in publishing, but he had no idea what it was. This has meant that there's less tailoring of the platform to the needs of the books. So books with specifically more difficult content don't tend to be catered for so well on the internet. So I'm thinking of books with heavy art, maps, ones that need video and things like that. They tend to get a bit left behind. The review I made was an assessment of the functionality of the platforms, but I made no assessment of the quality of the content, which I leave to you, the librarians, to do. Of course, my belief is all the content is wonderful. Why wouldn't it be? The other thing I should say is, when you're making an assessment, I've tried to be as subjective as possible, but we all have our own little foibles and tweaks, and so somewhere along the line you'll hear me go off on a sidebar about particular issues that I feel strongly about. First, the size of the ebook platforms I looked at. And there's quite a variety. Springer with 260,000 books is the biggest, and Manchester University Press with 1,300 books is the smallest, and the rest sandwiched somewhere in between. And I apologize to any publishers if these numbers are wrong, but I think I got them the best way I could from their websites, and so if they're wrong, they've changed in the last month or so. So what processes did I review? Well, I looked at searching and the number of books on the site, the type of searching available, and the offering of a searching prediction. Then I looked at the results, what the default display was. Does the site have books and journals? Does it have word search highlighting? Does it show the access status of the book and the ability to filter out books that you don't have access to? Can you filter and search the results? And can you search a single book to show the results and do those results show in context? And then finally on the content, do they display in XML or EPUB and PDF? What is the download format? Can you download by chapter and book? Does it link to other metrics or statistics? And is the book index live? That's one of my foibles, which I'll come to. So talking with searching, all the platforms offered quick, advanced searching and browse, except for Emerald, ACLS, and CUP, which didn't have advanced searching. Emerald also didn't offer browsing. Now, in all the platforms, quick search was a Google-style box, which everyone's familiar with. You bang in the word, and up come the results, except for Science Direct, which rather strangely offered a fielded quick search. Advanced search added more searching options. But in fact, on most of the sites, you could also include those options once you'd done a quick search because it allowed you to do that filtering afterwards. And in terms of searching, I think we all know that most people just want to put some words in a box. The idea of structured fielded searching is a bit of an ancient phenomenon that most of the users don't seem to want. And probably quick search with the option of being able to do some extra filtering afterwards is more than adequate. Browsing, in my view, is only going to be useful on sites that don't have that many books. When I tried browsing on Springer with their 260,000 books, there was no way I could browse anything that wouldn't come up with pages and pages of hits because they were filtered however low you went in the subject stream. 4 of the platforms, JSTOR, Taylor and Francis, Sage and Wiley, have searching prediction. So as you type in words, it suggests book titles or authors or words that would actually be found when you did a search. And JSTOR also gives a number of hits from that search as you're doing the prediction, which I think is a very useful feature, and to me would be something that all the sites ought to look at adopting. In terms of the results, 7 sites had books and journals, the rest were books only. Those that had journals, except for Brill, defaulted the search results to an article and chapter listing. Now, the problem with books and journals is when you're doing a search, I think you're wanting to find 2 different things. When you do a search for a journal, coming up with the journal title isn't really going to be much use. You want the article. But when you're coming up with trying to find a book, you probably want to find the book title first rather than the chapter. If you say a book has an average of 20 chapters and you did a search that would come up with 20 books, if you were looking at the chapters, you'd come up with 400 chapters, which is a much longer list to go through. So all those that defaulted to chapter when you did the search, except for JSTOR, offered the option to switch it to book. On JSTOR, I couldn't find any way of bringing up a list of books, only chapters. ProQuest and Taylor and Francis displayed the results with 2 tabs, so it was very easy to switch from books to chapter if you needed to. The other platforms had a feature on the filtering where you could click on book and it would bring up the books. Most platforms, other than Taylor and Francis and Sage, indicated next to each title on the hit list whether you have access to the content you have found. And all other than Sage allow you to search only the content you have access to. Now, I think that's important, and I know over the years as I've spoken to librarians, they don't want to waste their users' time finding books that they're not going to have access to. So either telling someone that they don't have access or allowing them to search the books they only have access to is going to be something that's very valuable. All the platforms allowed a level of filtering results once the search had been done. You could filter by year of publication, type of content, subject area. And the best of them, I think, also allowed for additional word searching within the results that you got. 5 of the platforms, EBSCO, ProQuest, Taylor & Francis, Emerald, and Science Direct, didn't have this feature, which again I think is a pretty basic function that you would expect. Search term highlighting. Now, this, I say, is one of my biggest bugbears. When I first developed the ebook platform EngNetBase, the software we used was the only software available at the time that allowed word search highlighting in PDFs. And to me, if I'm going to search for a word, I would like the product to show me where that word is in the article that I found. All the platforms, except for Gruyter, OUP, CUP, Taylor & Francis, Springer, and MUSE, had highlighting for both the results and when searching individual books. Some also listed the chapters in a ranking order to give you the idea of the number of hits of that word they found in the chapter. And they also, 3 of the platforms, JSTOR, EBSCO, and ProQuest, also showed the search terms in the context of the results list. So there was a short part of the content with the words in before you actually got into the book. But I do think that search term highlighting is the least you could expect. It's not taking technology to the bleeding edge to implement, so I think it's something that's reasonable to expect. In terms of content, all but 2, which were MUSE and Wiley, offered the content in XML and EPUB and PDF. But only 3 of the platforms, EBSCO, Gruyter, and Emerald, offered the option to download XML. All the others offered the PDF as the download content, although you could copy and paste the XML if you wanted to, although having tried that, I wouldn't recommend it. It gets a bit laborious. All except EBSCO allowed it downloading by chapter as well as book. Only 10 of the sites, EBSCO, ProQuest, Gruyter, CUP, Taylor & Francis, Springer, Brill, Wiley, Science Direct, and ACLS, allowed the downloading of the whole book. But CUP and Science Direct, although they allowed the downloading of the whole book, actually downloaded the book as separate chapters, which made it rather cumbersome to use because you had to keep on opening and closing each chapter, and you couldn't obviously search through the whole book. Now, years ago, when we first launched ebook platforms, publishers were nervous about allowing the download of the whole book because they worried that people would pirate the books and put them on websites. And I remember one librarian saying to me, "This is ridiculous. You're pissing off the people who are paying you money for your product in order to make the people who will never pay you in a million years for your product happy." Publishers, that battle has been lost. Don't worry, let people download the whole book if they want to. So those of you who don't do that, I suggest you make that option available. And why not go the whole hog and download it so that people can read the book on a Kindle if they want to? CUP offer this, although paradoxically, because they only allow downloading by chapter, they make it a bit of a laborious thing to read on a Kindle. But let's let people read in the format they want and let them download the book. In terms of content, 8 of the platforms did not offer word searching within a single book once you have selected it. And that again seems to me something that you would expect and maybe find useful even. 6 of the platforms, EBSCO, OUP, CUP, Springer, Manchester, and ACLS, have links to other metrics from a book. So you can look at things like alt metrics, you can see the book in WorldCat, book reviews, and usage information for the book on the platform. Springer seemed to go bananas in giving you usage information. It's very useful for people like me who are trying to do analysis. I'm not quite sure whether it's useful for most of the users, but credit to them for doing it. And then the final thing, maybe because I'm an old book publisher, I used to feel that the index for a book was an important item in the book. Someone had intelligently gone through the book, i.e. not a machine had gone through the book, but a person, and compiled an index which helped steer people to their areas of use. Now, if you're going to have an index in an e-book, why not allow the person to click from a word you find in the index to get back to the page in the book? But only 6 of the platforms, OUP, CUP, Bloomsbury, Sage, Science Direct, and the ACLS, had a live index. Taylor and Francis got around this problem by not having the index at all in their books. I don't know whether they know that or not. Other WYSI features that are available, JSTOR has in beta a text analyzer tool which allows you to upload a file into the product. It analyzes the texts and suggests you content on JSTOR that's relevant to the text you've entered. It's very clever, and as I was using it and thinking it was very clever, I sort of half wondered, was it useful? It's one of those things that may or may not be. Springer offer a service called MyCopy, where a user institution that subscribes can order a black and white print copy of the book for $24.95, which isn't bad, providing it's not too big. I can't remember what they consider too big, but there's only so generous they're prepared to be before they want to ding you some more. Well, thanks very much. I'm now going to pass over to Courtney to talk about it from a librarian perspective. You may applaud, yeah.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. So John pointed to a lot of really important features to consider in an ebook platform. I'm basically here to supplement that with some librarian things that if I'm a customer of yours, I would probably bug you about at the booth, things I talk to colleagues about in various library conversations. So this is meant to just kind of supplement the kinds of things John was already discussing. Not surprising, accessibility is top of the list. Content that can't be used by all of our patrons is not usable content anymore for us. It's becoming a deal breaker, and we want our ebook platforms to be compatible with screen readers and assistive technologies. Leaving people out is not a value proposition. WCAG compliance is ideal, obviously, even if in the license agreement it is preceded by language that says to the best of our ability, or if it's part of a roadmap. We understand that sometimes compliance can take stages, but some acknowledgement of that guideline is appreciated. VPATs can be very helpful, but they're not legally binding. They're good for information gathering purposes, but we really are looking for things that spell out compliance and exactly how that's going to be pursued. So at the Yale University Library, this is the criteria that's applied to evaluate whether something is accessible. These are the kinds of features that we look at. This criteria was developed by some of my colleagues at the University Library, Amari Serrano, Michael Fernandez, and Angela Sidman. A link to the blank rubric is available at that URL. Also in that document, you'll see usability guidelines as well. Usability and accessibility, it makes sense to talk about them in tandem. So these are the kinds of things that we look at. I will say, just from a methodological standpoint, I think it makes sense to consider the size and kind of the bandwidth of the publisher that you're evaluating. Big publishers with huge development teams can make these kinds of changes much more rapidly than smaller or growing publishers. So I think it's helpful to have that in mind when you're having these conversations about accessibility. It's a huge priority for us from a philosophical standpoint. Libraries are here to put content in users' hands, regardless of where they're coming from. And our institutions also want to mitigate the risk of litigation. So when you combine those two features, we're going to be talking to you about accessibility. Branding is another issue that we look at, and I have a lot of conversations with my colleagues about. In academic libraries, a lot of our users don't come into our buildings, but they're making use of our resources. The question is, do they know that we are adding that value? Do they know it's a library resource? What is their perception and what is their awareness? And branding, especially at an ebook platform level, is a big part of that equation. Access indicators, as John mentioned, are really important. Users shouldn't need to click into things to see, oh, maybe I can get this. That's kind of a recipe for frustration that we would all like to avoid. So clear access indicators, and then just any terminology that can anchor the user in knowing where the access is coming from is definitely beneficial. Personally, and feel free to disagree with me on this, I welcome other perspectives, of course, platforms that include open access content alongside licensed content should differentiate between the two. We're trying to help people figure out what they can access after their institutional affiliation is over. If they're a visiting scholar, after they graduate, if they're an undergrad, we want them to know what kinds of research they can do without having a login. And having that differentiated helps us do that. And we want to support lifelong learning, and we want to give the publishers credit for being involved in open access. But when the two are conflated at the platform level, it makes it really challenging for us to do that. So I work in a law library, so I've redacted the identity of the platforms here because a lot of things change. I took this screenshot a couple weeks ago, and this might look different now. So I'm not trying to condemn any current practices. I know it's a moving target. But this, I think, is good, clear branding. The box outlined in green indicates it is coming from the Yale University Library. We chose the term licensed resource. Whether that resonates with the user or not is a topic for a separate conversation, but at least it reminds them it's coming from the library. I've seen other variations that say things like brought to you by, and then the name of the library. But this is, front page, anchors the user, indicates access, and reminds them where it's coming from. This branding is also visible at the object level. So if you go to an actual ebook, you still see that. If you linked out to it directly from the catalog record, you would still have that indicator of, yay, you're in the right spot. And remember, the library, we're here to help you. I would consider this less clear branding. This box at the top, the gray box, is what you see when you first visit the page. There's no welcome or acknowledgement. There's just kind of that icon of a generic user. That's also where the search feature is, that magnifying glass search. If you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page is where that blue bar is. That's the footer that says access brought to you by Yale University Library. So it's indicating access, but it's so far removed from the search feature and from the top of the screen that the odds of the user actually encountering that statement I would not think is super likely. So I would consider this less clear branding. At the object level, you see the green unlock. Yes, you can get it, which is good. When I see this, I think it's open access content. If I read our documentation correctly from our entitlements page, it's actually subscription content. And it doesn't indicate that it is a library resource or remind the user where it's coming from. So this is an opportunity to maybe enhance the level of branding. It's not bad, it's not wrong, but maybe there's an extra layer that we could add to improve it. Metadata is really important for us. I feel a little guilty about how often I pester my vendors about MARC records for eBooks, but it's not because I'm bored, I promise. We want to drive traffic to your resources. We have access to them, we've paid money for them, we want the users to use them. And we might know what your platforms can do and what kinds of content you provide, but the users probably don't have that kind of awareness unless they've been specifically told, go here for eBooks on this topic. That means they're still relying on discovery layers, they're still using our catalogs to find those pathways to your content. And if you have limited access points in your records, if there are no subject headings, if things are improperly formatted, if the records are out of sync with what's actually on the platform, those are both limiting the opportunities for engagement with the resource, so that intersection between need and, oh, try this, and creating potential dead ends if the user does try to get to something they think they want and it's no longer there or is not there yet. Timing can work both ways. So basically, quality MARC records to us mean better discovery and access. The more they discover, the more they access, the better our return on investment, the more we want to continue acquiring the content. It's a virtuous cycle. So this, I actually had to pull from our original MARC file that we got because we did not ingest it into the catalog this way. We did global updates to change some things, so we thought it would be usable. You can see in the 100 field that the author's surname is missing. There's no subject heading, and the description is very sparse. When I look at this and when I talk to my colleagues about it, we think that really the only time someone would find this is if they were doing known item searching. The odds of them encountering it in another kind of query seem pretty remote, and so to us, this represents a bit of a problem. This is an example of a record that we did ingest. If you go to our catalog now and click MARC View, this is what you will see. There's a subject heading, there's a really good description, everything's properly formatted. Records that have the title, the author, and the publication date in the 245, please don't. Just please, I'm sorry. Okay, back on topic. So you can see this is an improved record from its earlier counterpart, and we like to see this. It makes us happy. The other thing that we look at when we talk about ebook platforms is how they are coexisting with our print acquisitions models. Having e-access does not end the need for print. I used to work in interlibrary loan in a former life, and I was shocked constantly by how often we would have ebook access to a title, and people would rather wait to get something in print through interlibrary loan because they wanted to read it all the way through. And there's been a number of studies on the cognitive processes involved in reading on a screen versus in print, in-depth searching versus, oh, I want to do some keyword analysis. The bottom line is we still need print sometimes. However, we can't do format duplication on all of these titles. Who can afford to buy everything in print and e? So platforms that allow us to balance these needs are really great. It helps us still keep that print acquisitions workflow alive and well and help meet the print demand without incurring a lot of overhead by trying to anticipate what the users might want in print, which takes extra space, which takes budget and staff time. So one example, as John mentioned, is Springer's My Copy, which allows that kind of on-demand print to coexist with e at the platform level. And this is just one option, one idea to address this kind of commingling of print and e, but I think it's a good way to think about it, if that makes sense. And John and I are fond of lists, so we also have some top 5. So I will just run through my top 5 and then turn it over to John for his and for concluding remarks. So the top 5 things I look at when I am looking at a brand new ebook platform I've never seen before. I'm going to look and see how the access is indicated and whether that's clear. I'm going to look at accessibility compliance and what kinds of features support assistive technologies. I'm going to look at seamless linking from the library catalog to the platform. Requiring users to download apps to get to the ebook. I can't even. Please stop. Please stop. I'm sorry. I don't mean to editorialize too much, but seamless linking makes people happier. We'll try and put a positive spin on it that way. Accurate, robust metadata with plenty of access points that give the users a good opportunity to encounter your resource and find it and enjoy it. And then I look at how MARC records are delivered, how often, if it's a cyclical thing. I don't think I'm the only one here who has been in the first week of a semester and the ebook that is being used by 3 different sections of a class for course reserve is suddenly gone. And now they all need it and it's back ordered in print and it's a crisis. So Again, this is a moving target. I understand there are a lot of moving pieces involved with what lives on the platform and when, but having a set schedule for when things are taken off, for when we're notified about changes in access, really helps empower us to make the best use of the collections, the money we're spending, and helps our users have a better experience with it overall. So those are the top 5 things I look at, and I'll turn it back over to John.
Thank you, Courtney. Thanks. Well, my top 5 are: word search highlighting should be standard. You should be able to download the whole book as one file. It should have searching prediction. It should indicate if you have access to a book, and the results should display by book with chapters as an option. And if all these things came together, the world will be happy and beautiful. Although, maybe it's happy and beautiful now if the sun's shining. It wasn't so great this morning, but so far it's been good. So thanks very much. If you've got questions, because this is being videoed, can you come up to the microphone, say your name and where you're from, and if you're lucky, you may get an intelligent answer. You may get an answer. I'm not sure it's going to be intelligent. So you stay there? Yeah.
Rich Goss, University of Central Florida. To your examples of a good MARC record, I would add a call number, at least the initial stem, because when we're trying to integrate our print, particularly in remote storage, with our eBooks, browsing by that call number, they need to be able to pull together, and I find a lot of errors. Or when they do a bracket, I had one that had L1 through L991 assigned to over 2,000 books. So all those call numbers don't even really have any meaning. And the first 5 I checked, none of the 5 belonged to that call number area, and 3 of them belonged, like one was an art book that is not an education book. So they were just wrong. So good call numbers assigned at least to the initial letter and first number.
That's a really good point. Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I'm Jonathan Greenberg from NYU Libraries. So about the word search highlighting, I wonder if you looked at deeper into the search algorithms that they're using, specifically into kinds of fuzzy search or stemming, because once you make a search fuzzy in some way, then the proposition of what you're highlighting when you're highlighting becomes a little bit more complicated.
I didn't look into that. It would be nice to believe that's the reason the search term highlighting wasn't there, but I somehow doubt it. But thanks. Okay, that's great. Well, if you all want to get off for lunch, and so do I, thanks very much for coming, and hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.